people who do this should be ashamed of themselves, because this is not Christ-like behavior. It's not even in the secular world very ethical.
One thing that I've almost found humorous, and I was just wondering if you were aware of this and what your thoughts were about this, Leighton. I've seen a few arguments online on YouTube and on Twitter, a couple where I've been engaged with people, but a couple where I've just been reading the engagement of other people back and forth. And you have turned into a derogatory term in the social media world for people who are not Calvinists. Have you noticed or picked up on this, that you've seen people who are like, oh, you're nothing but one of those Leighton Flowers followers?
Yeah, we're part of the flower patch, I've heard it said, or something of that nature. I understand some of the angst that people have when you critique something that is as beloved as the so-called doctrines of grace, as I once held to them. I can understand. I was pretty critical when I was a Calvinist of those who stood against Calvinism, because you kind of become a part of a brotherhood in a sense, like a group of feeling like you're kind of a group of elite, tight bonded group that's always having to fight off the arrows of the Arminian world and the free willers out there, the Pelagians that are out there trying to attack us. And we've got the forefathers of the faith standing with us, like Spurgeon and Luther and all these other guys, Calvin and other Zwingli and all these other guys standing with us. And so you feel like you're kind of have this righteous indignation against those who stand against you. And so sometimes that comes across as in a disrespectful, derogatory way. It goes both ways, by the way. I've seen people very derogatory and, you're just one of those Sproul Piperites or those Sproul followers, or, people do that to Calvinists too. So men in our fallen nature, we tend to act like creatures of our flesh. And so sometimes we treat people with disrespect. And I've been guilty of doing it in my younger years. I like to think it may be something I've matured out of, but all of us can be drugged back into our immature ways instead of dealing with each other as brothers and sisters in Christ should, listening to each other, hearing each other out, allowing the iron to sharpen iron. Because one of the things I like to remind my Calvinist friends is either I am right in my defense of God and his glory, or God has decreed for me to be wrong for the praise of his glory. So either way we look at it, I think I'm in a pretty safe place. And so who are you, old man, to question God for decreeing Leighton Flowers to start Sociology 101 and to question your deterministic view of God? So in somewhat in jest, I push them to think a little bit more deeply, hopefully, about their doctrines, and at least understand better why their doctrines need to be defended, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, well, to me, bringing that up just sort of shows the logic and the persuasiveness of some of your arguments, that if someone puts out I think a persuasive argument that's hard to answer back to for Calvinism, that there are people now who the easy response to that is, oh, that's just something Leighton Flowers would say. Instead of actually, going at what that person says, their rebuttal is, well, if I lump them with Leighton Flowers, that's an easy put down from their view. And so I think that shows that some of your teachings and the way that you're confronting Calvinism is starting to stick. And some of them are really good arguments in my view. And sometimes for those who aren't trained in how to, argue based on their own opinion, the easiest way is to just try to throw one name under the bus and assume that if I can lump you with him, then I can discount everything else you say.
Well, and Calvinists historically, not only today, have been really good at boogeymanning opponents.
Yeah.
And anybody who's familiar with the boogeyman argument or boogeymanning tactic is to try to paint somebody in the worst light possible. I think, based upon what I've learned throughout history, studying my own historical studies of Augustine and Pelagius was very badly boogeymaned. He is accused of believing and teaching things that I can't find evidence of him believing or teaching. In fact, I find just the opposite evidence, and so do the leading scholars who have actually spent time reading the original languages of Pelagius and Augustine's writings in their debates. And so, people who do this should be ashamed of themselves, because this is not Christ-like behavior. It's not even in the secular world very ethical to do this to other people, to accuse them or paint them in a way. The political world does it all the time, of course. You've seen it done in political speech, like, oh, that guy sounds like Hitler. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to paint that person in the worst light possible instead of hearing the guy's ideas. Well, he said something similar to what, Adolf Hitler said. And so he must be like Adolf Hitler, and people tend to do these kinds of things. And then once you've boogeymaned the person, taken something they've said out of context, you've ran it at the flagpole, you play it over and over and over again, put memes to it, play it out of context, draw conclusions that the author or the speaker never intended to be drawn, even doubling down after being corrected as to what the intentions were. These are all the kinds of things that pagans do, that unbelievers do to each other.
Yeah.
And the church should follow a much better example than that. And I'm ashamed sometimes that some people who call themselves Christians act in that way, not just towards me. I've called people out for doing that towards James White and John Piper and John MacArthur. And I try not to get sucked into those kinds of things by being baited on social media. It's just so easy to do that these days with social media so prominent, and you can hide behind your keyboard and say things, nasty things you would never say to a person's face, because you would have enough of a conscience not to ever actually say something out loud that you might be willing to say in quote unquote your mother's basement behind a screen. And that is shameful, and it's embarrassing for those who practice such things.
Yeah. And I think part of the issue too is that I think one thing social media does is that it empowers the short response, and attacking somebody and attaching them to the name always is the shortest response. And so as opposed to maybe a lengthy, let's look at what this whole verse means in context, or let's get real concrete definitions. It's easier just to say, oh, I'm going to package this one person with all this other group of people that I don't agree with, and then I can just dismiss it all together and not deal with it.
Exactly. So and this is not a theological thing. This is a character thing.
Oh yeah.
Because I know, as you well know, I know people who are strong Calvinists like Chris Date or Sean Cole, who don't typically, as far as I'm aware, do that kind of stuff. They treat me with respect. They don't speak badly about me behind my back or meme about me behind my back, as far as I know. And on the other side, like I said, there are people who claim to be provisionists and Arminians who do very similar kind of tactics to Calvinists. And so it's not about the soteriology, it's about a character issue.
Yeah.
And that character is across the board, regardless of what soteriological view you hold to. And so I think we need to be willing to own that whenever we are treating any Christian who disagrees with us in that manner, or even unbelievers, that for that matter. I would be embarrassed to treat some unbelievers the way that some people have treated me who disagree with me. And so I hope to set a better example on the broadcast. I hope to set a better tone for theological discussion among those with whom I disagree.
And that's one of the reasons I like watching your broadcast overall, is that it's not filled with that type of arguments where you're just debasing someone's character or pigeonholing them into the worst thing that they say and seeing that in the worst light possible. But I do feel like you substantially deal with, real philosophical views, interpretations of the text. How do we see the Bible in context? And that's one of the reasons that, I like your book. You're just simply walking through passages of the Bible. You're talking about understanding them in context, as opposed to not just taking that one verse out. And so that's one of the great things about what you give to us in the Potter's Promise and your other teachings.